On the morning of February 16, 2003, the Diamond Squad, the world's only specialised diamond police, arrived at what was undoubtedly one of the most secure vaults on Earth. They made a call to SecuriLink, the vault's alarm company, and asked for the status of the alarm. Fully functional was the reply. The vault is secure. But they could see with their own eyes that this wasn't the case. The foot-thick 3-ton steel door was wide open and undamaged. They stepped inside the subterranean vault and found themselves knee-deep in cash boxes, bags and jewellery cases. The floor was a sea of treasures of unfathomable value. Diamonds, rubies and emeralds of every conceivable cut and clarity littered the tiled floor. There were priceless artifacts and heirlooms, thick wads of cash, Rolex watches and solid gold bricks. If this was the leftover loot the thieves were unable to carry, it was clear that this was a heist of impressive scale. In fact, an estimated $100 million worth of jewels had been taken in what turned out to be the largest diamond heist in history. And all done with stealth and intelligence. No alarms were triggered and no one was hurt. It was a clandestine robbery in the dead of night. Hello and welcome to the Little Shop of Crime. I've covered a lot of tragic cases lately, so I fancied stocking something a little different today. And hey, theft is still crime, and this is theft on the grandest scale. Honestly, it's like a plot lifted straight from a Mission Impossible film. But first, some quick shopkeeping. I offer interesting, usually lesser known true crime cases most weeks, so if you fancy stopping by again in future, feel free to subscribe. Okay, let's investigate. This is the $100 million diamond heist. Today we are popping over to Belgium and to its largest city, Antwerp. Just a short 40-kilometre or 25-mile trip north of its capital, Brussels, the nigh on 2,000-year-old city is dripping with history and culture and home to over 500,000 people. For centuries, Antwerp has been a leader in world trade, famous for its colossal port, which even today is one of the largest on Earth. And the historic Bourse of Antwerp was the world's first purpose-built commodity exchange. But today Antwerp is recognised as the world's hub of a more specific trade: diamonds. In the centre of this bustling city, right by the historic railway station, sits its illustrious diamond district, occupying an area roughly 1 square mile. It's an impressive network of jewellers, cutters, polishers and dealers. 84% of the world's rough diamonds pass through the districts every year, with over $16 billion in cut gems traded within its exchanges. And that's despite the fact that an estimated 3/4 of trades are made under the table. The Diamond District is undoubtedly one of the densest concentrations of wealth on the planet, so it's no surprise that it has 2 police stations and is under 24-hour dedicated surveillance, with an estimated 2,000 security cameras watching the inside and outside of its buildings at all times. And then there's the Antwerp World Diamond Centre itself. It's an imposing grey fortress located on the Hovenierstraat, a narrow street that cuts right through the middle of the Diamond District. The street is blocked by heavy steel bollards and the building has its own private security force. And that's just the surface level of security that protects the centre's famous vault. Owners of priceless trinkets, diamonds and jewels opted to store their valuables inside the vault because it was far more secure than any bank. Situated 2 stories below ground, the bomb-proof vault was supposedly impregnable, protected by 10 layers of high-tech security. There was a camera, of course, monitoring the 3-ton steel vault door at all times. The door itself had a combination lock with 100 million possible permutations. There was a keyed lock that required a theoretically impossible to duplicate foot-long key. A foot-long key, imagine that, like a full Subway sandwich-sized key. There was a seismic sensor that would detect even the slightest rumblings of a drill. Not that there'd be any point in trying that. The foot-thick door was built to withstand 12 hours of constant heavy-duty drilling. There was a magnetic sensor that provided a constant magnetic field, which would be broken if the door were opened, triggering the alarm systems. And behind the door was a locked steel grate. Even if you managed to bypass all of that, the inside of the vault itself had a light sensor, a security camera, a heat and motion sensor, and a keypad required for disarming them. This was the Titanic of vaults, and it turned out to be about as impenetrable as the Titanic was unsinkable. Cue Leo Notarbartolo, a blue-eyed charmer, a master manipulator with speech level 100. Born in 1952, Leo lived in Turin, Italy, in the foothills of the Alps. By his own account, he was a born thief, starting from the age of just 6 when he stole 5,000 lira, or about $8, from a sleeping milkman. It wasn't exactly Ocean's 11, but it sparked something deep inside him, a lasting devotion to the art of thievery. In his teenage years, he stole from teachers, learned how to pick pockets and locks and hotwire cars. In his 20s, he began to focus his attention on people, mostly jewellery dealers, tracking their movements and habits. Then came his 30s, when he used his razor-sharp charm to begin to assemble a potent team of thieves, each with his own special ability. It was a bit like the Avengers, but for crooks. There were key forgers, alarm specialists, safe crackers, and lock pickers. By the turn of the millennium, he'd managed to pull off dozens of large-scale robberies as the figurehead of the team of thieves that officials would go on to dub the School of Turin. And Leo was very acquainted with Antwerp's diamond district. It offered the perfect places to fence stolen jewellery, where its gold could be melted down and jewels removed and sold. He visited every couple of weeks and even had a small rented apartment close to the diamond district itself. During his visits, he'd regularly sit inside a small cafe on Hovenier-straat, where he could sip espressos and gaze out at the heart of the world's diamond trade, where he'd watch wealthy merchants skitter from place to place, concealing bags of gems or with small briefcases handcuffed to their wrists. It was while sitting there that he began to hatch a plan to integrate himself into this world. In the year 2000, he began renting a small, barely furnished office inside the World Diamond Centre itself, costing him 687 Belgian francs per month. This provided him with an ID card that granted him 24-hour access to the building, where he posed as an Italian gem merchant. The card also gave him access to a safety deposit box within the vault, where he stored modest gems and set up trades with genuine dealers. He spent more than 2 years using his charm to befriend staff and to learn the layout and security systems of the building and its vault, gradually worming his way deep inside the diamond trade community, whose members were unaware that they'd welcomed a prolific jewel thief into their midst. It was all part of a bigger plan. He was playing the long game, but he couldn't do it alone. Infiltrating the World Diamond Centre's vault would take an audacious heist of a magnitude unlike anything the world had ever seen, particularly if he wanted to do it properly and covertly, which would minimise his chances of being caught and maximise the potential payout. And for this, he'd need some help. Leo began to assemble a crew of the most talented thieves he knew. A motley band of men with the intention of taking from the rich and, well, keeping it. First there was Speedy, a skilled thief but a skittish, paranoid man. The others thought he was a liability, but he was Leo's oldest friend. They'd worked together for 30 years. The Monster, named not just for his imposing size and physical strength, he also had a monstrous set of abilities. He was an incredible lockpicker, electrician and mechanic, and he was an experienced getaway driver. The others were a little afraid of him. The Genius. He was a master electrician specialising in alarms. An all-round electronics expert, he was said to be capable of disabling virtually any alarm system. And finally, the King of Keys, a much older man who had used his time to establish himself as one of the best key forgers on Earth. He was quiet, composed, and of course a gifted lockpicker too. And so the crew was assembled, and the planning of what would come to be known as the heist of the century was underway. And it seems that Leo may have shared the same gadget supplier as James Bond.
Don't touch that!